Hey guys, Josh with ABG Tutorials, and in this video I'm going to be talking about adding forms to your HTML pages. And I honestly can't think of very many websites that don't use forms. Forms are basically going to be used any single time you want to input or take some inputted information from the user. You're going to see this on almost everyone's website because most people have a contact us page. And then that's where you can fill out the forms, what you're actually filling out, the text boxes, the radio buttons, the drop-down menus. Those are forms. Or on many websites also you can leave a review. That would be a form, or a survey of some sort. But all of that is going to be collecting information from the user. So here's an example of what a form could look like. This would be a form that was created for a high school survey. And they've got this page nicely organized, split into personal information, where you can input your first name, your last name, what grade you're in, gender, male, female, probably could have added other, birth date, and then we've got, which school subjects do you like, and if other, please specify. So these are all forms. So this is a label. This here would be a text box. This is a date. These are radio buttons. These are all examples of forms. There are a lot of forms, and I'm not going to go through very many of them. I'm going to go through the important ones that I think you're going to use, and they need to go between a form tag. We should be used to this syntax. And then the main one you're going to be using is an input. And then we're going to change the type. So the name that goes in the type here is going to change, and then that's going to change the way that our form looks. Something that I'm going to talk about for the attributes. The attributes don't really matter until you go and actually use this stuff. But you can't use forms without another form of programming language. So we're going to be very limited. We're going to be able to create the forms, put them on our pages, but we're not going to be able to use them yet. So in the future, I will be making a video on how to store what people type in the forms as variables using JavaScript, and how to send that to an external document, or how to send that to an email or something like that. But that's going to be in the future. The attributes are actually crucial here, but when it comes to designing it, they don't matter as much. I'm going to talk a little bit about that when I show you. As I mentioned, the purpose of taking in user information is so that it can be used. If people are providing feedback to you as a business owner, if that's what the website's about, that needs to get back to the business owner. And so that needs to happen through a programming language. And so we'll get there. And there's a couple of different ways to do it. And there's a bunch of different programming languages that you could use for this. So here's a form that I created with what I think are the essential forms. When you think of a lot of the surveys that you would ever do, when you think of a contact us page, when you think of leave us a review, there's really not that many things going on. So that's what I've got set up here. This first one is going to be called a text box. And I'll show you the code shortly here. First name, last name, usually for any area where you want to specify something, you can type it. When you want to offer a user a variety of choices, but they can only select one, that's when you should be using a radio button. So these are radio buttons. Male, female, other. Notice how it only allows me to select one. Now I'm going to show you that there's an attribute we have to use in order to have this work the way that we want it. A checkbox is going to be used when you can select more than one. So I want you to identify between these two. Radio buttons, you only want to select one of them, so you provide a choice, and they have to choose one. And a checkbox, they can select none of them, or they can select all of them. For example, if you wanted to select which pizza toppings. Well, I like cheese, I like ham, I like pepperoni, pineapple. You don't have to put anything, you could fill them all in. This would be the area where probably leave a review or contact us or anything like this. And I'm going to show you what this one is called. And so this is where you can type a long answer. And you're able to drag this around and make it bigger or smaller. And you're able to set the default size using attributes. This is a similar form to the radio buttons. Sometimes you want to have a smaller, more concise page where you just have this kind of pop up and list your options. But realistically, this works the same way as a radio button. You only want to select one of them. And there are many variations of this where you can select more than one as well. But I'm just showing you the most important ones. And then there's always going to be usually buttons. OK, cancel. There's going to be like a submit button, a cancel button, and there are so many more variations, you guys. There are that birth date one I showed in my PowerPoint. There's a color picker. So what's your favorite color? There's a bar that you can drag to the left or to the right. For example, how satisfied were you with this product from 0 to 10, and you can kind of drag it around, and it just looks better than just putting 0 to 9 or whatever. There are password forms where you have to type a password and then it's going to let you into a certain file or to a certain page. But as I mentioned earlier, you're going to need programming languages for that. So this is just on the setting up of the forms, and then we'll come back to it in the future. So let's show you the code here. Now I chose to use a label. So label, you see so many labels here. That's not really needed. You could just type your HTML. You could put these in tables. You could put these in lists. You can do all sorts of things. But the label is just something that you can add an attribute to, and you can use it, if you're on a mobile and you want to kind of highlight something when they select the label, you've got a little bit more options here. So I chose to use the label, but understand if I delete this label, my form is going to look the exact same. So here's where I'm getting the difference between the text box, the radio button, the checkbox, the type here. So the type is text, the type is text, the type here is radio, and I have 3 radio buttons. The type here is checkbox, okay? Now, you don't necessarily need the values, but in the future, the programming part is going to use the values. And so the value here for a text box actually changes what's typed in there by default. And the value will get changed when the user types something. So we're going to be using this value kind of property in the future programming language to take what they've selected or what they've typed. And same with gender here. So the value is set as male, female, or other based on what they select. Now here's what I want to show you about the radio buttons. In order to have them grouped like this so they only select one, you have to have the same name. So see how I've named them all gender? That gives me the option of only selecting one. Now, if I change this or make a spelling error, let's say call this genders, and then I load this back up, what you're going to notice is I can select between female and other because they have the same name, but my male has a different name now. And so look what happens. It actually lets me select 2 of the radio buttons. That's usually not what you want to do. But what you do want to do is sometimes you'll have different groups of radio buttons on the same page. And in that case, you just want to put your grouped names with, you put your groups with the same name, and then that way it's going to only allow you to select one. And that value, again, like I said, you don't need it for now, but in the future you do need it. That's the whole point. We want to be able to store this or email it or save it into a variable. The same thing here for the checkbox. My values are entered. They're not necessarily needed. And something I did talk about a couple times is the ID attribute. And this is also where you probably want to just add a unique ID here as well, so that you can get to this using programming techniques that'll actually search for the ID on your form. So that's the main ones right here: the text box, radio button, checkbox. Okay. Now this is a common one. It's a different. It's not an input type. It's called a text area. And so the attribute here for rows or columns just sets the default size. So let's just change this to 50. Let's change this to 100. Save this just to show you. Look at what happened here. So my text area is way too big. I don't like that. So you want to just set it to a size. Let's go back to something like 30 and 40 just to see what that looks like. Oops. Okay. And you might look at that and say, I'm not a big fan of that either. Let's change this. And then you look, oh, I don't like that. Let's change this back to 40 and this to maybe 15. You know, by now you should get the idea between attributes. Then that looks a lot better. All right. And then this way, if you're creating a responsive web page and you shrink it down to a mobile, you want this to be able to fit on a mobile device. So that's where all of that tweaking and customizing comes in. The last one here is going to be called a select. And once again, names and values should be added for the programming aspect. And when you want to add a new option, it's just an option tag here. So option, value math, and then the word math. Value physics, physics. And we could add an ID here as well. Just remember, IDs should be unique and shouldn't be reused anywhere else on my page. And then we close the select. And the last one here is the button, an input type button, value OK, button, value cancel. And so you could change this if you want this to maybe say submit. There actually is a submit type as well. It's used a little bit different because it's submit something to somewhere on the internet. Once again, that needs programming languages. So I could change the value of my button to say submit, and there it is, submit. Now nothing happens here. But with JavaScript or a programming language, when I click this, I can do all sorts of things. I can change these, I can store values, I can change colors. You really do have, I guess, a lot more tools in the toolbox for creating an interactive website. Because in today's day and age, yeah, a lot of the time you need content, but there's always going to be an aspect on your page where you want it to be have some sort of a user interactivity aspect to it. And like I said, reviews, surveys, or contact us would be perfect examples of that. Okay, so as I say here, there are many, many, many more forms than this, and there are many uses of them. But without that programming language aspect, guys, I wanted to just show you these important ones. Now, I'm actually going to save this form, and in the future, I'm going to create a video that's just going to show you a little bit of JavaScript, maybe how to store them as variables, how to email them to yourself, or how to save them to an external document. Okay? That is basically it, you guys, for the HTML series, because the last thing is CSS, but CSS is actually going to be its own section. So my next video is going to be on introducing CSS, how it can be used, but it's going to be very, very intro based because CSS is a thing that you can master. It has so much content that it's way more than just the HTML series here. In the future, I'm going to master CSS, maybe not master it, but I'm going to learn a lot about it. And so my next series is actually going to be about CSS. Thanks for watching. As usual, guys, always be grinding.